I stood up from that kitchen table, walked to the drawer where I kept the good scissors, and cut my own son's name off the top of the renovation blueprints he'd left spread across the counter. Angelus, snip, Angelus, just like that. He'd written it there in black marker, Ryan Collins, residence, over a drawing of the house I'd lived in for 45 years. Angelus, the house he'd just told me to leave. He watched me do it, and his mouth fell open, and he said, "Mom, what are you?" And I set the scissors down, and I smiled at him for the first time in a week. "Angelus, you want the house," I said. "Then you should have asked whose name is on the deed." "Angelus, because it wasn't his." "Angelus, it was never his." And by the time he found out what that meant, it was already too late. If you're watching this, do me a favor, tell me in the comments what city you're in. Angelus, I want to see how far my story travels tonight. And if you've ever given everything to someone who forgot what you gave, subscribe and stay with me, because you are going to want to see how this one ends. My name is Margaret Collins, and I want to start with the scissors. Not because that was the beginning. Angelus, it wasn't. But because for the rest of my life, whenever anyone asks me about the day everything changed, that's the moment my mind goes to first me, 68 years old, standing in my own kitchen, Angelus, cutting my son's name off a piece of paper while he stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman who raised him. Angelus, he didn't. Angelus, that was the whole problem. He'd stopped recognizing me a long time before that morning. Angelus, I just hadn't figured it out yet. Angelus, let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before so you understand what he threw away. The house sat on Maple Street, the last one on the block before the road curves off toward the old church. White clapboard, green shutters, a porch that ran the length of the front. My husband Robert and I bought it in 1979 when I was pregnant with Ryan, and we had $1,100 to our names and a bank manager who looked at us like we were crazy. Robert wore his only suit to that meeting. He shook that man's hand and he said, "Sir, I will pay this mortgage if it kills me," and it very nearly did, and he paid every cent. Angelus, he built things, my Robert. Angelus, with his hands. Angelus, the staircase inside that house he built. Angelus, the kitchen table. Angelus, he built, sanded it down over 3 weekends. Angelus, rubbed the oil into it himself. Angelus, and there's a burn mark near the corner from a Thanksgiving in 1000. Angelus, 994 when I set a hot pan down without thinking, and he laughed so hard he had to sit on the floor. The bookshelves in the front room he built. The little cedar closet in our bedroom where I kept our important papers, he built that too. Angelus, that house wasn't lumber and drywall to me. Angelus, it was Robert's hands. Angelus, every board of it. We brought Ryan home from the hospital to that house. I taught him to walk in that hallway, holding both his fat little fists while he wobbled toward the kitchen. I measured his height against the dining room door frame every birthday. With a pencil you can still see the marks. Ryan, age 4, age 7, age 11, climbing up the wood like a ladder. I nursed Robert in the front bedroom through the last 4 months of his life, when the cancer took him piece by piece, and I held his hand at the end, and he squeezed my fingers, and he said, "Maggie, you keep this house in your name, and you keep it there. You never know who's going to get greedy when I'm gone." Angelus, I told him he was being paranoid. Angelus, I told him our son would never. Angelus, he looked at me for a long time. Angelus, and he didn't say a word. He just squeezed my hand again and closed his eyes. Turns out Robert knew our boy better than I did. Angelus, even dying he knew. Ryan grew up and married a woman named Lauren. Angelus, and they had a daughter, Sophie. Angelus, who is the light of my whole life. Angelus, and when the economy turned bad and Ryan lost his job at the insurance company, Angelus, I did what any mother would do. Angelus, I said, "Come home." Angelus, I said, "There's plenty of room." Angelus, "Stay as long as you need." Angelus, "Save your money." Angelus, "Get back on your feet." That was 4 years before the morning with the scissors. Angelus, 4 years I let them live under my roof. Angelus, in my house. Angelus, eating at Robert's table. Angelus, and I never took a dime from them for it. Angelus, I cooked. Angelus, I cleaned up after grown adults. I watched Sophie so they could go out on the weekends. I did their laundry. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I'm a grown woman who folded her 40-year-old son's underwear because he never had time, and I did it gladly, because that's what you do. Angelus, you give. You give and you give and you tell yourself that love is the giving. And somewhere in those 4 years, I stopped being Ryan's mother and I became the help. Angelus, it happened slowly. Angelus, that's the cruel part. Angelus, there's no single day you can point to. Angelus, it's 1,000 small things. It's the mom. Can you grab that used to be mom, would you mind? It's your son walking past you in the hallway without looking up from his phone. It's your daughter-in-law rearranging your kitchen, where you've known where every spoon lives for 45 years and not thinking to ask. The way people talk about you in the next room, a little too loud, forgetting you can hear. Angelus, I heard a lot those 4 years. I want to tell you about one thing I heard because it matters for what came later. Angelus, it was maybe 6 months before the scissors. I was on the stairs, coming down, and they were in the kitchen, and they didn't hear me. Lauren was talking. Angelus, and she said I'll never forget it. I could recite it in my sleep, she said. I just feel like we're waiting around for her to either die or go into a home so we can finally have our life. Angelus, is that a terrible thing to say? And my son, my Ryan, the boy I carried and nursed and sat up with through every fever, my son said, it's not terrible. Angelus, it's just honest. I stood on those stairs and I held the railing and I did not make a sound. And then I turned around and went back up and I sat on the edge of my bed and I told myself I'd misheard. Angelus, I hadn't misheard. Angelus, I just wasn't ready yet. So that brings me to the Sunday morning. Angelus, the real beginning. I was at the stove making pancakes. Sophie loved my pancakes, still does, and Ryan came in and sat down at the table, and Lauren came in behind him and leaned against the counter with her arms folded, and I knew, the way you know when the air in a room changes. Angelus, I flipped a pancake and I said, you two are up early. Mom, can you sit down a sec, Ryan said. Angelus, we want to talk to you. Angelus, we want to talk to you. Angelus, never good, those words. Not once in the history of the world has anything good followed, we want to talk to you. Angelus, I turned off the stove. Angelus, I sat down across from my son at Robert's table. Angelus, and I folded my hands and I waited. Angelus, he couldn't look at me. Angelus, that was the first thing. My whole life, whenever Ryan had something hard to say, he couldn't meet my eyes. He was that way. As a boy, when he broke a window or failed a test, he'd stare at the floor and mumble. He was 42 years old, and he was staring at the tablecloth like a boy who broke a window. Angelus, Mom, he said. Angelus, you've had a good run here. We think it's time you move out. Angelus, I heard the words. Angelus, I understood every one of them. Still, some part of my brain refused to accept them, the way you refuse a stare that isn't there in the dark. Move out, I said. We've talked about it a lot, Ryan said, faster now, like he wanted to get it all out before I could interrupt. Angelus, me and Lauren. And we think it'd be better for everybody. Place over on Fenwick Sunny Meadows, it's real nice, Mom. Angelus, they've got a nurse on site. Angelus, activities. Angelus, people your own age. Angelus, a retirement home. Living, Lauren corrected from the counter. Angelus, gentle. She always corrected me gently, like I was a child who'd used the wrong word. Angelus, it's a lovely community, Margaret. Angelus, we toured it. Angelus, that stopped me. Angelus, you toured it. Angelus, a flicker. Angelus, just a flicker between the two of them. Angelus, but I caught it. We went to look at options, Lauren said. Angelus, for you. Because we care about you and we want you somewhere you'll be safe and looked after. When did you tour it? Angelus, Margaret. Angelus, when? Angelus, Ryan cleared his throat. Angelus, couple weeks ago. Angelus, a couple weeks ago. So for 2 weeks my son and his wife had been driving out to Fenwick Road. Angelus, walking the halls of a facility. Angelus, checking the price. Angelus, comparing it against the cost of keeping me. Angelus, planning my removal from the only home I'd ever known, and they'd smiled at me across this table every single night and said nothing. Angelus, I felt something go very still and very cold inside my chest. Angelus, but I kept my hands folded and my voice level. Angelus, and what happens to the house, I asked. Angelus, when I'm safe and looked after out on Fenwick Road. Angelus, what happens to Robert's house? That's when Lauren pushed off the counter and came to the table, and her whole face lit up, because this was the part she'd been waiting for. Angelus, that's the wonderful thing, she said. Angelus, we want to renovate. Really make something of this place. Kitchen's original, Margaret. It's practically an antique. We'd put in a proper island, open up this whole wall here. She swept her hand through the air, and I watched her erase Robert's kitchen with one gesture and turn the sewing room into an office. I've been dying for a home office. Angelus, it's going to be beautiful. Angelus, but it's hard to renovate around someone, I said. Angelus, she blinked. Angelus, well, Angelus, yes, just easier with the space clear. Angelus, the space. Angelus, I was the space. 45 years in that house, and I had become square footage that needed clearing. Angelus, I looked at my son. This is what you want. And Ryan finally looked up at me, and God help me, his face was hopeful. Angelus, like the hard part was over. Angelus, like I'd taken it well. Angelus, I really think it's the right thing, Mom. Angelus, for all of us. You'd be around people. You wouldn't have all these stairs. You wouldn't have to keep up this big old house all by yourself. Honestly, there it was, that word honestly, the renovation would bump the property value way up. Angelus, it's the smart move. Angelus, everybody wins. Angelus, everybody wins. I want to tell you what I did in that moment, because I'm proud of it. Angelus, I didn't scream. Angelus, I didn't cry. I didn't throw the syrup pitcher at my daughter-in-law's head, though I'll admit the thought crossed my mind. Angelus, I said, let me think about it. Angelus, and Ryan's whole body sagged with relief. Angelus, and he reached across Robert's table and squeezed my hand. Angelus, and he said, Angelus, thank you, Mom. Angelus, I love you. Angelus, you'll see this is a good thing. Angelus, I love you too, I said. Angelus, and here is the God's honest truth, I meant it. Angelus, even then. Angelus, even knowing what I knew. That's what they don't understand, people who've never been a mother. You can love someone with everything you have and still see, in one clear, terrible instant, that they have stopped loving you the same way back. I got up and I went back to the stove and I finished the pancakes. Because Sophie was coming down, and whatever was broken between me and her father, that child was going to have her pancakes. And Sophie sat at the table and ate and chattered about school, Angelus, and I watched my son and his wife smile at her over the rims of their coffee cups, Angelus, already redecorating my house in their heads, Angelus, and I thought, Angelus, they've priced me out. They sat down with a calculator, and they figured out that their mother costs more than she's worth. That was the thought that changed everything. Angelus, not the anger. Angelus, the clarity. Angelus, but I still didn't have my plan. Angelus, that came later that day in the closet. Couldn't sleep that night, and I didn't try. I sat downstairs in the dark long after they'd all gone up, and I listened to the house tick and settle around me the way old houses do. Robert used to say the house was just settling in for the night, same as us. I sat in his chair by the fireplace where the two of us used to sit every winter with a blanket over our knees, and I looked at the mantel full of Ryan's school photos, gap-toothed to graduation cap, and I looked at those pencil marks on the doorframe, and I let myself grieve. Angelus, I grieved my son. Not the man upstairs, that man was alive and well and picking out countertops in his dreams. Angelus, I grieved the boy. The one who used to crawl into bed between me and Robert during thunderstorms. Angelus, the one who cried at his own goldfish's funeral. The one who, the night Robert died, gripped my hand in the hospital hallway and whispered, Mom, I don't know what I'd do without you. Where did he go? When did the boy who couldn't imagine life without me become the man who couldn't wait for me to be gone? Angelus, I don't have the answer. Angelus, I've had years to look and I still don't. People change, Angelus, and sometimes they change into strangers wearing a face you love, Angelus, and there's no moment you can point to and say there, Angelus, that's when I lost him. Sitting in that chair, something hardened in me. Robert's voice came back, clear as if he were sitting across from me. Keep this house in your name, Maggie. You never know who's going to get greedy. Angelus, and I thought, Robert. Angelus, my love. Angelus, whose name is on the deed. Angelus, I couldn't remember. Isn't that something? I'd signed 100 papers in that blurry, awful year after he died, and I genuinely could not remember what any of them said. Angelus, for all I knew, Ryan's name was on it. For all I knew, this house was already half his and I'd been living in it on borrowed time. Angelus, I had to know. Couldn't wait until morning. Angelus, I went up the stairs in the dark. Angelus, slow and quiet. Angelus, avoiding the third step from the top that creaks I'd known which step creaked for 45 years. Angelus, another thing they never bothered to learn. I went into my bedroom and shut the door soft behind me, and I opened Robert's cedar closet, and I got down the old wooden box we kept our papers in. My knees complained the whole way down to the floor. Angelus, someone your age. Angelus, I told my knees to hush. I laid everything out on the bed under the lamp. The marriage certificate 1976, both of us babies. Angelus, Robert's Army discharge papers. A photograph of the two of us at Niagara Falls, soaked to the bone and laughing, so young it hurt to look at. Angelus, insurance forms. Buick that hadn't run since 2015. Angelus, and underneath all of it, Angelus, folded in third. Angelus, gone soft at the creases. Angelus, the deed. Angelus, my hands were shaking as I opened it. I had to hold it right up under the lamp to read the small print. And I found the line, Angelus, the line that mattered, Angelus, and I read it once, Angelus, and then I read it again, Angelus, and then I sat down hard on the edge of the bed because my legs had quit. Angelus, Margaret Collins. Angelus, sole owner. Angelus, not joint, not with rights of survivorship to Ryan Collins. Angelus, not in trust. Angelus, sole. Angelus, owner. Every board of it, every window pane, every pencil mark on that door frame, every inch of Robert's staircase mine. Angelus, only mine. Angelus, Ryan didn't know. I was certain of it the moment I saw my name. Because if my son had known this house was mine and mine alone legally, completely, with no claim of his anywhere on it, he would never in a million years have sat across that table and told me to leave. Angelus, you don't evict your landlord. He assumed, killed me, sitting there in the lamplight. He assumed the way children assume the sun will come up, that the house was simply there, waiting, a thing that would drop into his hands the second I was safely stored on Fenwick Road. Angelus, it never once crossed his mind to check. Why would it? In his head it was already his. I was just the last obstacle standing between him and the granite. I sat there a long time with the deed in my lap, and I felt Robert in the room with me. That warmth on the back of the neck, the way you feel someone standing behind you. Angelus, and I swear to you I heard him. Angelus, plain as day. Now you understand why I told you, Maggie. Angelus, I understand, I said. Angelus, out loud. Angelus, to the empty room. Angelus, and that's when I stopped grieving. Angelus, grieving was over. Something else moved in to take its place, and it was cold, and it was clear, and it felt, I'll be honest with you, it felt good. Angelus, I did not sleep that night either, but it wasn't the same not sleeping. The first kind, downstairs, that was the not sleeping of a woman whose heart was breaking. This was the not sleeping of a woman building a plan. Time the sun came up, I had it. Angelus, all of it. Angelus, start to finish, laid out in my head clean as one of Robert's blueprints. Angelus, I would sell the house. I would sell it quietly, before Ryan ever suspected a thing, and I would be gone, really gone, into a life of my own choosing before he ever knew there was anything to suspect. Angelus, he wanted me out of the house? Fine. Angelus, he'd get his wish. But he was going to learn the hard way exactly what it cost to shove out the one person holding the whole thing up. Angelus, I got dressed. Angelus, I put on my good blouse, the blue one Robert liked. Angelus, I don't know why. It felt like the kind of thing you should be wearing when your life turns a corner. And then I went downstairs and made pancakes and poured everyone's coffee and smiled and said good morning. And Ryan said, "Morning, Mom. You sleep okay?" And I said, "Like a baby, honey," and he never suspected a thing. That was the first morning of the rest of it. And I want you to understand something about the woman standing at that stove flipping pancakes in her good blue blouse. Angelus, she was not broken. Angelus, she was not confused. Angelus, she was not someone your age. Angelus, she was awake. For the first time in years, wide awake. I waited until Ryan left for the temp job he'd finally taken, and Lauren took Sophie to her mother's for the day like she did most Mondays, and the house was empty and quiet and mine. And then I sat down at Robert's table with the phone, and I called the one person in the world I knew I could trust. Angelus, Claire Whitmore. We'd gone to high school together 100 years ago, back when we both had waists and opinions about boys. Claire had been selling houses in this town for over 20 years, And she knew every street and every family and every buyer with real money, and this was the important part, she could keep her mouth shut. Angelus, in a town this size, that's rarer than diamonds. Angelus, she picked up on the second ring. Angelus, Whitmore Realty. Angelus, Claire. Angelus, it's Margaret. There was a pause, just a beat, and then her voice changed, dropped, softened, the way an old friend's voice does when she can already hear that something's wrong. Angelus, Margaret Collins. Angelus, well, my lord. What's the matter, honey? You sound funny. And that undid me a little, that she could tell from 3 words. I had to press my hand flat against Robert's table and take a breath before I could get it out. Angelus, I need to sell my house, I said. Angelus, silence on the line. Angelus, a long one. Your house, Claire said carefully. Angelus, the house on Maple. Angelus, Robert's house. Angelus, that's the one. Angelus, Margaret, her voice went very quiet. Angelus, what happened? Angelus, so I told her. Sitting at Robert's table in my good blue blouse, I told my oldest friend everything. Angelus, the Sunday morning. Angelus, the pancakes going cold. Angelus, you've had a good run here. Sunny Meadows and the tour they'd taken behind my back. Angelus, it's hard to renovate around someone. The island, the office, the wall they wanted to knock down. And then because Claire was the only living soul I would ever tell, I told her about the stairs, 6 months back, and what I'd heard. We're waiting around for her to die or go into a home so we can finally have our life. Angelus, and Ryan's answer. Angelus, it's not terrible. Angelus, it's just honest. When I finished, Angelus, Claire didn't say, oh honey, Angelus, and she didn't say I'm so sorry, Angelus, and she didn't do any of the soft things people do when they want to comfort you and make you feel small at the same time. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that told me I'd called the right woman. That ungrateful little, she stopped herself. Margaret, I remember when you took the second job. Angelus, at the hospital cafeteria. Angelus, to cover that boy's college. Angelus, I remember it. Angelus, you worked the 6 a.m. Angelus, line for 3 years so he wouldn't have loans. Angelus, you remember that? Angelus, I remember everything, honey. Angelus, that's my whole problem, a breath. Angelus, so. Angelus, you want to sell. You're sure? Because I have to tell you, once we start this, there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Angelus, this is a bell you can't unring. Angelus, I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the burn mark on the table and the pencil marks on the door frame and the window over the sink where I'd stood for 45 years watching a little boy who used to chase butterflies in the yard. Angelus, I let myself feel one last time. Angelus, Claire, I said, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Angelus, but I need 2 things from you. Angelus, name them. First, it's got to be quiet. Angelus, no sign in the yard. No listing anybody in this town could stumble on. No open house with strangers tromping through my bedroom. Angelus, Ryan cannot know. Angelus, not until it's finished and I'm gone. If it gets back to him, it's over. Private sale, Claire said, and I could hear her already turning it over, already working the problem. I've got 2, maybe 3 buyers who deal that way, folks who want their business kept off Main Street, same as you. I bring them through when your boy's at work. We keep the whole thing off the books till the ink's dry, a pause. Angelus, what's the second thing? Angelus, I closed my eyes. And I made myself say it out loud because saying it out loud made it real. Angelus, the second thing, I said. When it's done, when it's sold and signed and there's no undoing it, I want to be the one who tells him. Angelus, not you. Angelus, not a lawyer. Angelus, not a letter. Angelus, me. I want to look my son in the eye and tell him what he did. Angelus, Claire was quiet for a long moment. Margaret Collins, she said finally, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like pride. Angelus, I've known you 50 years. And I don't think I've ever heard you sound like this. Angelus, like what? Angelus, like yourself, she said. Angelus, finally. Angelus, like your own self. Angelus, I opened my eyes. Angelus, through the window over the sink. Angelus, the morning light was coming up gold over the yard where my boy used to chase butterflies. Angelus, and my hand was steady on Robert's table. Angelus, and I was not afraid. When can you bring the first buyer through? I asked. Angelus, Wednesday, Claire said. Angelus, Ryan works Wednesday. Angelus, 9 to 5. Angelus, then Wednesday it is, a pause. Angelus, you go get dressed, pretty honey. Keep smiling at that boy across the dinner table like nothing in the world is wrong. Angelus, can you do that? I looked at the deed, still folded in my apron pocket where I'd carried it downstairs. Angelus, Margaret Collins. Angelus, sole owner. Angelus, Claire, I said. I have been smiling at people while my heart broke for 45 years. This is the first time it's going to be worth it. Angelus, and I hung up the phone, Angelus, and I picked up the good scissors from the drawer, Angelus, and I walked over to the counter where Ryan had left his renovation drawings spread out the night before, Angelus, dreaming of the house he thought was already his. Angelus, Ryan Collins' residence he'd written across the top. Angelus, in black marker. Angelus, over a drawing of Robert's house. Angelus, I read it one more time. Angelus, then I started to cut. The scissors were still sitting on the counter when I heard Lauren's car pull into the driveway that Wednesday morning, and I nearly dropped the coffee pot. She wasn't supposed to be home. Mondays and Wednesdays were her days at her mother's with Sophie. Every week for 2 years running, like clockwork, and I had built my whole plan around that clockwork. Claire was due at 10 with the first buyers, a young couple from 2 towns over, quiet money. No interest in gossiping around town about who was selling what. I had exactly 90 minutes to get the house looking its best and get out of the way, and now I was standing at the sink with my heart slamming against my ribs, watching my daughter-in-law's car roll up the driveway a full 3 hours early. I did the only thing I could think to do. I shoved the renovation drawings, the ones with Ryan's name cut clean off the top, into the bottom drawer under the tea towels, and I wiped my hands on my apron, and I made my face into nothing at all. Lauren came through the front door with a bag from the pharmacy, and her sunglasses still on. Sophie's got a fever, she said, breezing past me toward the stairs. Mom's watching her, but I forgot her medicine. I gotta run it back over. Relief went through me so hard my knees actually wobbled. Angelus, is she all right? Angelus, she's fine, just cranky. Lauren was already halfway up the stairs. Don't let me interrupt whatever you're doing. Whatever you're doing. Like I was always doing something faintly embarrassing that didn't concern her. I stood very still in the kitchen and listened to her feet cross the upstairs hallway. Angelus, into Sophie's room. Angelus, out again. Angelus, back down the stairs 2 at a time. Angelus, out the front door, gone. The whole thing took maybe 4 minutes. Angelus, 4 minutes. That's how close I came, that very first Wednesday, before Claire had even pulled up the driveway with a single buyer. I sat down hard in a kitchen chair and put my hand flat against my chest until my heart stopped trying to climb out of it. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just planning a sale. Angelus, I was running an operation, Angelus, in my own home, Angelus, against my own family, Angelus, and one wrong minute could blow the whole thing apart before I ever got to finish it. Claire arrived at 10 sharp, right on time, with a young couple named the Petersons trailing behind her, nice enough, but nervous, the kind of first-time buyers who flinch at every sound like they expect to get caught doing something wrong. Angelus, which in a way we all were. Margaret, this is Todd and Brianna. Angelus, Claire said. Angelus, breezing in like we were old friends meeting for tea. Angelus, not conspirators. They're looking for something with character. Told them there wasn't a house in this whole county with more character than yours. Angelus, I showed them through. The staircase, the good light in the front room, the kitchen with its original cabinets that Robert had refinished himself 2 summers before he got sick. Angelus, Todd kept glancing at his phone. Angelus, Brianna kept glancing at Todd. And within 20 minutes I knew, the way you just know, that this wasn't the sale. Angelus, they were young. They wanted something they could gut and modernize. They were exactly the kind of buyer Ryan would have been if Ryan had any money of his own. Angelus, they left without an offer. Claire caught my eye on the porch and gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't you worry about that, she said low, once they were in their car. First one's never the one. Angelus, I've got 2 more lined up this week. We'll find your people, Margaret. Angelus, I don't have forever, Claire, I said. Ryan wants an answer about Sunny Meadows by the end of the month. If I stall too long, he's going to start asking questions. Angelus, you let me handle the timeline. You just handle him. She squeezed my hand on the porch rail, right where Robert used to lean when he watched the sunset. Angelus, you're doing beautifully. Angelus, nobody suspects a thing. Angelus, I wanted to believe her. But that night at dinner, watching Ryan across the table, I wasn't so sure. Angelus, so Ryan said, Angelus, pushing peas around his plate, Angelus, not looking up. Have you thought any more about Sunny Meadows? Angelus, Lauren went very still beside him. Sophie, thank God, was too busy telling some long story about a substitute teacher to notice the temperature of the room had changed. I've thought about it, I said carefully. Angelus, and I said I'd let you know. Just Ryan set his fork down. Contractor wants to start booking us in for estimates. Angelus, he's got a 6-week wait as it is. If we don't get on his calendar soon, we're looking at next spring before anything happens. Angelus, anything happens. Meaning before he could start knocking down his father's kitchen. Angelus, I understand you're eager, I said. Angelus, and I kept my voice as level and pleasant as I could make it. Angelus, because that had become the whole game now, staying pleasant. Angelus, staying agreeable. Angelus, giving him nothing to hold on to. Angelus, nothing to get suspicious about. Angelus, I'm still weighing things. Angelus, it's a big decision, Ryan. Angelus, I'd think you'd want me to take it seriously. He had the decency to look a little ashamed. Angelus, of course, Mom. Angelus, take your time. Angelus, he glanced at Lauren. She gave him a look I caught out of the corner of my eye, a look that said, keep pushing, and he cleared his throat. Angelus, I just don't want you to feel like there's any rush. But also, you know. Angelus, there kind of is. Angelus, I smiled at my son. A real smile, or close enough to one that he couldn't tell the difference. Because 45 years of loving him had taught me exactly how to smile at him, even when something inside me wanted to scream. Angelus, I'll let you know soon, I said. Angelus, I promise. Angelus, I wasn't lying. Angelus, I would let him know soon. Angelus, just not the way he thought. The second Wednesday brought a retired couple named the Aldridges, Angelus, and they liked the house well enough, Angelus, but the husband had a bad hip and couldn't manage the stairs, Angelus, and by the time Claire called to tell me they'd passed, Angelus, I was starting to feel the whole thing slipping through my fingers like sand. I want to be honest with you about that week, because I think people watching this need to understand it wasn't some clean, triumphant march from betrayal to victory. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed with the deed in my lap and thought, maybe this is foolish. Maybe I'm an old woman playing at spy movies in her own kitchen. Maybe I should just go quietly to Sunny Meadows and let them have their island and their office and be done with it. And then something would happen to remind me exactly why I couldn't. Angelus, it happened on a Thursday. I'd gone up to the attic to look for a box of Robert's old tools. Daniel Harper hadn't come into the picture yet. I didn't even know his name at that point. I just wanted to find Robert's good hammer, the one with the taped handle, Angelus, because I'd started thinking about what I'd take with me when I finally left. I was up there an hour, maybe more, and I didn't hear Ryan and Lauren come home. I was coming down the attic stairs when I heard my name. And Margaret's just going to have to accept it, Angelus. Lauren was saying, Angelus, down in the kitchen, Angelus, her voice carrying up through the old ductwork the way sound always did in that house. I know it's hard, Ryan, but we can't keep tiptoeing around her feelings forever. Angelus, this is our life too. Angelus, I know, Ryan said. Angelus, he sounded tired. Angelus, not cruel, just tired. The way you sound when you've decided something is a burden, and you're impatient for the burden to be lifted. Angelus, I just hate seeing her upset. Angelus, she's not going to stay upset. She'll get out there, she'll make friends, she'll have her bingo nights or whatever they do. A pause. Angelus, I heard the refrigerator open and close. Honestly, Ryan, I think it'll be good for her. She's been rattling around this big house all by herself for years. Angelus, it's not healthy. Angelus, rattling around. Angelus, like I was a marble loose in a drawer. Angelus, it's just the whole time I was growing up, Angelus, Ryan said, Angelus, and something in his voice made me stop halfway down the attic stairs. Angelus, one hand on the rail. Angelus, this was like, Angelus, the safest place in the world. And now I'm the one kicking her out of it. It's a weird thing to sit with. For one small foolish second, hope moved in my chest. Angelus, there he is, I thought. Angelus, there's my boy. And then Lauren said, you're not kicking her out, Ryan. Angelus, you're helping her transition. Angelus, there's a difference. And besides, her voice dropped, but not quiet enough, never quite quiet enough. It's not like she doesn't have the money for it. Between her Social Security and whatever your dad left her, she'll be perfectly comfortable. Angelus, this isn't a tragedy. Angelus, it's a phase of life. Angelus, a phase of life. I stood on those attic stairs with Robert's old hammer in my hand, and I felt the last soft place in my heart, the place that had still been holding out hope for my son, go cold and quiet. Angelus, I came down eventually. Angelus, I made dinner. Angelus, I set the table for 4. Angelus, same as always. Angelus, and when Ryan asked how my day was, I said fine, quiet. Angelus, and I never once let on what I'd heard. That night, Angelus, alone in my room, Angelus, I took out the deed again, Angelus, and I read my name one more time, Angelus, and I made myself a promise. Not out of anger this time. Out of something colder and steadier than anger. Angelus, a phase of life, Lauren? Fine. Let's see how you feel about phases when this one's over. 3rd Wednesday, Claire brought a family with 3 young children who took one look at the stairs and the old radiators and decided the house needed too much work for their budget. I was starting to wonder if it would ever happen if I'd wake up one morning and find I'd stalled Ryan as long as I could, and Sunny Meadows would swallow me whole, Angelus, and Robert's house would fall to a wrecking crew with a granite island and an office where my sewing room used to be. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning in the 4th week, Claire called with a different tone in her voice entirely. Angelus, Margaret, she said. Angelus, I think I found them. Angelus, found who? Your buyers. Angelus, a couple named Daniel and Emily Harper. Angelus, early 60s. Angelus, moved back to the area to be near their grandkids. Angelus, cash offer. Angelus, no contingencies. Angelus. And Margaret, she took a breath. They specifically told me they're looking for a house with history. Angelus, their exact words. A house that's already been loved. Angelus, something in my chest turned over. Angelus, when can they come? Angelus, Thursday. Angelus, 10 a.m. Angelus, Ryan's at work? Angelus, he's at work. Angelus, then get the coffee going, honey. Angelus, I think this might be it. I didn't sleep much that Wednesday night, and it wasn't the bad kind of sleeplessness anymore. It was something closer to the night before Ryan's first day of kindergarten or the morning of my own wedding, that particular electric feeling of standing right at the edge of something enormous. I woke Thursday morning before the alarm, and I made coffee, and I stood at the sink and looked out at the yard where a little boy used to chase butterflies, and I thought about how strange it was that I was about to hand this whole life over to 2 strangers I'd never met, Angelus, and how much stranger it was that it felt like relief. Angelus, Ryan left for work at 7:40. Angelus, same as always. Angelus, kissing my cheek on his way out the door, saying, Angelus, have a good day, Mom. Angelus, with absolutely no idea that his mother was about to sell the ground out from under him. Angelus, Lauren took Sophie to school. Angelus, the house went quiet. 10 o'clock exactly. Claire's car pulled into the driveway, and behind it a second car, a modest sedan, nothing flashy, which I noted and appreciated, because I had come to distrust flash, and 2 people got out. Angelus, a man, tall, silver-haired, moving carefully like his knees bothered him. Angelus, a woman beside him, small. Angelus, dark-eyed. Angelus, already looking up at the house with an expression I couldn't quite name yet. Opened the door before they reached it. Margaret, Claire said, this is Daniel and Emily Harper. Angelus, Daniel shook my hand, firm and warm. Angelus, Mrs. Angelus, Collins. Angelus, thank you for having us. Angelus, but it was Emily I watched. Emily stepped past me into the front hallway and stopped. Angelus, just stopped. Angelus, right there on the threshold. Angelus, and looked up at the ceiling and down at the floor and around at the walls, slow. Angelus, like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. Oh, she said quietly. Angelus, almost to herself. Angelus, everything all right? I asked. She looked at me and smiled, and there was something in her eyes that caught me completely off guard. Something wet, something moved. Different in here, she said. Angelus, you can always tell. The moment you walk in. Angelus, some houses feel like showrooms. This one feels like somebody's whole life. Angelus, I had to look away from her for a second. Angelus, I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected, after 4 weeks of strangers walking through my home measuring it for what it wasn't, to have someone walk in and immediately understand exactly what it was. Was, I said, when I trusted my voice again. Angelus, 45 years of it. Angelus, I walked them through slowly. Daniel crouched down in the front room and ran his hand along the original oak floor, the same way Robert used to check it every spring for warping. Nobody builds like this anymore, he said, mostly to himself. You'd pay a fortune to get floors like this put in new, and they still wouldn't feel like this. In the kitchen, Emily's hand went straight to the burn mark on the table, like she was drawn to it. Angelus, what happened here? Giving. Angelus, 1,000. Angelus, 994, I said. Angelus, I set a hot pan down without thinking. My husband laughed so hard he had to sit on the floor. Angelus, she laughed too, soft, delighted. You can tell this table's been used, she said. Angelus, real life happened at this table. Angelus, we went up the stairs. Angelus, Daniel's hand trailing the whole way along the banister Robert built board by board. Angelus, and into the bedrooms. Angelus, and down the hallway toward the dining room. Angelus, and that's when Emily stopped again. Angelus, dead still. Angelus, in front of the door frame. Angelus, the pencil marks. Angelus, Ryan, age 4. Angelus, Ryan, age 7. Angelus, Ryan, age 11. Crouched down, the way you'd kneel in front of something sacred, and trace the lowest mark with one finger. Angelus, was this your son? Angelus, my throat closed up. I had to swallow twice before I could answer. Angelus, it was. Angelus, how old is he now? Angelus, 42, I said. And then, because something about her stillness made me want to tell the truth. All of it, I added. He's the reason I'm selling. Angelus, Emily looked up at me from the floor. Angelus, she didn't ask what I meant, not right away. Just watched my face, and whatever she saw there, it made her stand up slowly and take both my hands in hers. A stranger, a woman I'd known for 20 minutes, holding my hands in my own dining room like we'd known each other our whole lives. You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to, she said. But for what it's worth, whatever brought you to this moment, I promise you this house will be loved here. We won't paint over these, she nodded at the pencil marks. Angelus, not ever. Angelus, I couldn't. Angelus, I don't cry easily. 45 years of being the strong one in every room had trained that out of me a long time ago. But I felt my eyes go hot and I had to look up at the ceiling for a second, breathing before I could speak again. Angelus, thank you, I said. You don't know what that means to hear. Angelus, they stayed almost 2 hours. Daniel asked practical questions, the roof, the furnace, the plumbing, all the things Robert had kept meticulous records on in a folder I still had, and I answered everyone honestly, because I didn't want to sell this house to someone under false pretenses. I wanted it to go to someone who knew exactly what they were getting and wanted it anyway. By the time they left, Angelus, standing on the porch where Robert used to lean at sunset, Angelus, Daniel shook my hand again and said, Mrs. Collins, I don't want to get ahead of things, but I think you should know we've been looking for 2 years. 2 years, and every place we've walked into has felt like a hotel room somebody decorated to sell. Angelus, this is the first place that's felt like a home in all that time. Angelus, Emily squeezed my arm on her way past. Angelus, we'll be in touch very soon, she said. Angelus, I promise. I stood on that porch and watched their modest little sedan pull away, and Claire came and stood beside me, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. Angelus, well, she finally said. Angelus, I think that's it, I said. Angelus, I think that's them. Claire smiled, slow and satisfied, the way she used to smile back in high school when she'd gotten away with something. I told you we'd find your people, Margaret. The offer came that same evening while Ryan and Lauren were upstairs and Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I was pretending to read a magazine with my heart going like a hammer against my ribs. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to look at it, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the thing in the sink. Full asking price, the text from Claire read. Angelus, no contingencies. Angelus, cash. Angelus, they want to close as fast as possible. Margaret Emily told me she cried in the car on the way home. Said it's the first house in 2 years that felt like somebody had actually lived a life in it. Angelus, call me when you can talk. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and I read that message 4 times, and I laughed, a real laugh, the first real laugh I think I'd had since that Sunday morning at the kitchen table weeks before. I laughed until it turned into something closer to crying, quiet, careful. Angelus, my hand pressed over my mouth so nobody upstairs would hear. Angelus, full asking price. Angelus, no contingencies. Couple who cried over my burn mark and promised never to paint over my son's pencil marks. Angelus, it was really happening. Called Claire back from the porch that night, after everyone had gone to bed, wrapped in Robert's old cardigan against the cold. Angelus, tell me everything, I said. They want to close in 3 weeks, Claire said. Which, Margaret, I have to be honest with you, is fast. Angelus, faster than usual. Angelus, but they're cash, they're motivated, and frankly, the faster this moves, the less chance there is of anybody in this town catching wind of it before you're ready. Angelus, 3 weeks, I repeated. Angelus, can you be ready in 3 weeks? I looked back through the porch window at the darkened house, at the shape of the staircase in the dim hall light, at the kitchen where I'd made 45 years of dinners. Claire, I said, I've been ready for a month. Then I'll draw up the paperwork tomorrow. We'll do the signing at your new place. You did say you found an apartment? I have a lease starting the 1st of the month. Angelus, little place near the library. Angelus, nobody knows about it. Angelus, not even Ryan. Good, Claire said. Angelus, keep it that way a little longer. A pause. Angelus, Margaret, can I say something? Angelus, go ahead. Angelus, I've sold a lot of houses in this town. A lot of them to people going through hard things, divorces, deaths, bankruptcies. And I have never once in 20 years seen somebody handle it the way you're handling this. Angelus, most people fall apart. You're building something. I looked out at the yard, silver in the moonlight, at the spot near the fence where Robert used to grow tomatoes, at the whole quiet, sleeping shape of the life I'd built and was now, carefully, deliberately, taking apart board by board so nobody could take it from me first. Angelus, I had a good teacher, I said. Robert always said the ground you stand on should be yours. I just didn't understand what he meant until now. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. Angelus, I lived 2 versions of myself at once. Angelus, in the daylight. Angelus, at the dinner table. Angelus, I was Margaret the mother. Angelus, the grandmother. Angelus, the woman quietly considering Sunny Meadows. Angelus, letting Ryan measure the kitchen for his island. Angelus, letting Lauren pick out touches and hold them up against my walls, asking, what do you think? Angelus, does this read more sage or more olive? Angelus, and me saying sage, I think. Angelus, while inside I was screaming. And in the quiet hours, the early mornings and the late nights, I was someone else entirely. A woman meeting a lawyer in a coffee shop 2 towns over so nobody would recognize the car in the parking lot. A woman signing initials on page after page of closing documents at Claire's kitchen table, my hands steady, my heart pounding. A woman standing in an empty apartment near the library, walking the small rooms, imagining where Robert's chair would go, where I'd hang the one painting I was taking with me, a little watercolor of the house, painted by a neighbor 20 years back. Angelus, the only piece of that house I intended to keep. Angelus, there were close calls. Angelus, God, there were close calls. One Tuesday, Lauren came home early again twice in 1 month, which felt like the universe testing me, and found me on the phone in the kitchen. I'd been talking to the lawyer's office, Angelus, confirming the closing date, Angelus, and I heard her key in the door, and I panicked and said, Angelus, loud and clear, yes, Angelus, that sounds like a lovely bingo schedule, Angelus, thank you for the information, Angelus, and hung up, Angelus, and turned around to find Lauren standing in the doorway with her keys still in her hand, Angelus, looking at me strangely. Angelus, bingo schedule, she said. Angelus, Sunny Meadows, I said, my heart in my throat. Called to ask about their activities calendar. Angelus, her whole face lit up, genuinely, brightly lit up in a way that told me everything about how badly she wanted this. Margaret, that's wonderful. Does this mean you've decided? Angelus, I'm getting closer, I said. Angelus, and I even managed a small smile. Angelus, and inside I thought, Angelus, you have no idea how close. Another time. Ryan found the boxes I'd been quietly packing in the back of my closet, not for Sunny Meadows, but for the apartment. Though he didn't know that, and he knocked on my door with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom, you're really doing it, he said, looking at the boxes. And there was something in his voice, some small crack of feeling that almost undid me. I didn't think you'd actually start packing. You asked me to think about it, I said carefully. Angelus, I'm thinking about it. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd had since he was a boy, since the days he'd stand in this exact doorway confessing to some small crime, a broken lamp, a failed test. Keep picturing you actually gone from here, and it's weirder than I thought it'd be. One single unguarded heartbeat, I almost told him. Angelus, I almost said, Ryan. Angelus, sit down. Angelus, there's something you need to know before this goes any further. Angelus, there's still time to make this right between us. Angelus, but then I thought of the attic stairs. Thought of Lauren's voice through the ductwork. Angelus, it's not like she doesn't have the money for it. Angelus, this isn't a tragedy. Angelus, it's a phase of life. Angelus, and I thought of Ryan's answer to it. Angelus, it's not terrible. Angelus, it's just honest. Angelus, the moment passed. Angelus, change is hard, I said instead. Angelus, for all of us. Angelus, he nodded. Angelus, and he looked at the boxes one more time. Angelus, and he left. Angelus, and I sat down on my bed with my hand pressed to my chest until it stopped shaking. Angelus, closing day was a Thursday. Angelus, I remember because it was raining. Angelus, a soft gray rain that Robert always used to call good sleeping weather. Angelus, and I drove myself to Claire's office with the deed folded in my purse for the last time. Angelus, and I sat across a conference table from Daniel and Emily Harper and a lawyer I'd hired quietly 2 towns over. Angelus, and I signed my name Margaret Collins on document after document. Angelus, and with every signature I felt something lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Emily reached across the table at one point while the lawyers were shuffling papers and took my hand. Angelus, thank you. Angelus, she said quiet. Angelus, just for me. Angelus, for trusting us with it. Angelus, thank you for loving it the way it deserves, I said. Angelus, you have no idea how much that means. When the last signature was down, Daniel slid an envelope of keys across the table, my old keys, which I hadn't needed to bring, but had brought anyway. Angelus, some final small ceremony, and Claire's associate handed me a check that represented more money than I had ever seen at one time in my entire 68 years of life. I sat there holding it, and I felt Robert beside me so strongly I could have sworn if I turned my head fast enough I'd catch him smiling at me. You did it, Maggie, I could almost hear him say. Angelus, you kept it in your name. Angelus, just like I told you. Angelus, I drove to my new apartment afterward alone. Angelus, in the rain. Angelus, and I let myself in for the first time as a woman who owned nothing on Maple Street anymore. The rooms were small and bare and completely, wonderfully mine. I stood in the middle of the empty living room and I turned in a slow circle, looking at 4 walls that belonged to no one but me, that no one could take a vote on, that no committee of 2 could decide were too much for someone my age. And then I sat down on the one piece of furniture I'd already moved in Robert's chair, Angelus, the one from beside the fireplace, and I allowed myself finally, Angelus, after weeks of holding it together, to cry. Angelus, not from grief. Angelus, or not only from grief. From something bigger than that, Angelus, something I didn't fully have words for yet, relief, Angelus, and fear, Angelus, and a strange fierce pride that felt entirely new, Angelus, like a muscle I hadn't known I had. The house on Maple Street belonged to strangers now. Angelus, kind strangers. Better strangers in some ways than the family who'd wanted to push me out of it. And somewhere across town, my son was picking out paint swatches for a kitchen that no longer existed for him to renovate. Angelus, he still didn't know. Angelus, but he was about to. I had exactly 4 days left in that house, and I spent them the way a soldier spends the night before a battle, quiet, careful, making sure nothing showed on my face. Robert's chair was already gone, moved into the apartment near the library. The boxes I'd been quietly filling for weeks sat stacked in my closet, and every time Lauren asked about them, I said the same thing for Sunny Meadows, honey, just getting ahead of things, and every time she smiled that pleased little smile, Angelus, the one that told me she believed every word. Closing was done. Angelus, the check was in my new bank account. The Harpers had the keys sitting in a drawer in their own home, waiting for the day I'd hand them the house for real. Angelus, and I hadn't told Ryan a single thing. I want you to understand what that felt like, living inside that lie for 4 more days. Angelus, every dinner was a performance. Every good night, Mom, from my son was a knife I had to smile through. Angelus, I'd sit across the table from him, Angelus, watching him talk about paint colors and contractor schedules, Angelus, and some part of me wanted to grab his arm and shake him and say, Ryan, Angelus, look at me. Angelus, really look at me. Because in 4 days none of this is going to matter, and I need you to see me one more time before it happens. Angelus, but I didn't. I'd promised myself I'd do this clean, and clean meant silence until the very end. The Sunday before the move, Sophie came and sat with me on the back porch, while her parents were inside arguing quietly, but not quietly enough about paint samples. Angelus, she was 9 years old, sharp as a tack, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she saw straight through whatever face you were wearing. Grandma, she said, swinging her legs off the edge of the step. Angelus, are you sad about moving? Angelus, I looked at her for a long moment. My granddaughter, the only person under that roof who still looked at me like I was a whole person and not a line item. Angelus, a little, I said honestly. Angelus, but also not, sweetheart. Angelus, sometimes moving is a good thing. Mom says you're going somewhere with a beauty salon. She wrinkled her nose. Angelus, that sounds boring. I laughed, actually laughed, the first easy laugh I'd had in that house in weeks. Well, I said, I might surprise everybody. She looked at me sideways, the way children do when they sense there's a secret but can't quite name it. You're being weird lately, she said. Angelus, good weird. Angelus, like you know something. Angelus, out of the mouths of babes. Angelus, I reached over and squeezed her hand. Angelus, I love you very much, I told her. Whatever happens, I need you to remember that. None of this, none of what's about to happen, has anything to do with you. Angelus, she frowned, a small crease between her eyebrows, 9 years old and already sensing more than her parents gave her credit for. What's about to happen? I heard the back door open behind us before I had to answer. Angelus, Lauren calling Sophie in for her bath. Stood up, Angelus, kissed the top of my granddaughter's head, Angelus, and watched her go, Angelus, and I thought not for the first time that whatever came next, Angelus, I would make sure Sophie never paid the price for what her parents had done to me. Monday morning I woke before the sun again, same as I had the day I found the deed. I lay in bed in the dark, and I listened to the house breathe around me one last time, the particular creak of the 3rd stair from the top, Angelus, the way the pipes knocked when the furnace kicked on, Angelus, sounds I'd known so long I didn't hear them anymore, Angelus, not until I was about to lose them. Angelus, except I wasn't losing them. Angelus, that was the thing I had to keep reminding myself. Angelus, I wasn't the one losing anything. I got up and made coffee in Robert's pot for the last time in that kitchen, and I stood at the sink and looked out at the yard, gray in the early light, and I let myself say goodbye. Angelus, not out loud. Quiet, private. Angelus, thank you, I told the house. Angelus, thank you for holding all of it. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what they wanted to do to you. Angelus, but I found you someone who will. Ryan came down around 7, same as always, already dressed for work, and he kissed my cheek and said, "Morning, Mom," and poured his own coffee, and I watched him move through that kitchen like he already owned every inch of it, Angelus, and something in my chest went very still and very calm. Angelus, today, I thought. Angelus, today is the day. I decided, lying awake in the dark, that I couldn't wait any longer. The movers were coming for remaining things Wednesday. I couldn't have Ryan discover empty rooms before he heard it from me. It had to be today, while he was at work, so that by the time he came home the truth would already be sitting on the table waiting for him, and there would be no more room for lies, mine or his. Have a good day, I told him, and my voice didn't shake at all. You too, Mom. He was already at the door, already halfway gone, already thinking about countertops. Hey, I was thinking, this weekend, maybe we finally sit down and lock in the Sunny Meadows paperwork. Get you settled before the contractor starts. I looked at my son standing in the doorway of a house he no longer owned, making plans for a future that no longer existed, and I felt something close to pity move through me, right alongside everything else. We'll talk this weekend, I said. Angelus, I promise. Angelus, he smiled, satisfied, and left. And I stood in the kitchen a long time after his car pulled away until I trusted myself to move again. I spent that whole day at the apartment, Angelus, unpacking what little I had left to unpack, Angelus, hanging the small watercolor of the house above the mantel, Angelus, arranging Robert's chair just so by the window where the afternoon light came in warm. Angelus, I made the bed. Angelus, I put dishes in the cabinets. Angelus, I stocked the little refrigerator. I built board by board the way Robert used to build things, a life that was entirely, completely my own. Angelus, and around 4 o'clock I called Claire. Angelus, it's time, I said. Angelus, there was a pause. Once he sees that envelope, Margaret, there's no taking it back. Angelus, I've been sure for a month, I said. I want it on the table when he gets home tonight. Angelus, I'll bring it over myself, Claire said. Angelus, you want me there when it happens? Angelus, I thought about that. Angelus, thought about my son's face. Angelus, the shock of it. Angelus, and whether I wanted a witness or whether this was something that needed to happen just between the two of us. Angelus, the way everything important between us always had. Angelus, no, I said. Angelus, this part I need to do alone. Angelus, but Claire, thank you. Angelus, for all of it. Angelus, I couldn't have done any of this without you. Honey, Claire said, and her voice went soft in a way I rarely heard from her. You did this. Angelus, I just held the door open. You're the one who walked through it. She dropped the envelope off at the house at 5:30, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given her weeks before, placing it square in the middle of Robert's table where Ryan would be sure to see it the moment he walked in. Angelus, inside the copy of the closing documents. The new set of keys, the ones that no longer opened anything for him. And a short letter from Daniel and Emily Harper, Angelus, warm and kind, Angelus, introducing themselves as the new owners, Angelus, saying how much they already loved the house, Angelus. And because I'd specifically asked them to include it a line letting Ryan know the previous owner would be in touch about arranging for his and Lauren's belongings to be moved out on a reasonable timeline. Angelus, I wasn't there when he found it. Angelus, I want to be honest about that. I'd thought, Angelus, for a long time, Angelus, about whether I should be, whether some part of me wanted to see his face in that first raw second, Angelus, whether that made me cruel. But in the end I decided I didn't need to see it. Angelus, I'd carried enough of his cruelty silently for years. I didn't need to collect his shock like a trophy. I was sitting on my new little porch near the library, in a folding chair I'd bought that very afternoon, with a cup of tea going cold in my hands when my phone rang. Angelus, I looked at the screen. Angelus, Ryan. Angelus, I let it ring. Angelus, once. Angelus, twice. Angelus, 3 times. Not to torture him, though I won't pretend some small, wounded part of me didn't feel a flicker of something like satisfaction, but because I needed those extra seconds to steady myself, to remember exactly who I was and exactly why I'd done this. Angelus, I picked up on the 4th ring. His voice came through thin and stretched, a wire pulled taut to breaking. Mom, there's an envelope here. Angelus, on the table. Whose keys are these? Mom, what is this? Angelus, I closed my eyes. Angelus, behind him, faintly. I could hear Lauren's voice rising, sharp and frightened. What is it, Ryan? What's wrong? What does it say? Angelus, I sold the house, I said. Angelus, calm. Angelus, steady. 6 words I'd been rehearsing in my head for a month, Angelus, and when they finally came out, Angelus, they came out clean, Angelus, without a single tremor. Angelus, silence. Angelus, a long ringing silence, Angelus, and then I heard him say it again, Angelus, quieter this time, Angelus, like the words themselves didn't fit in his mouth. Angelus, you sold the house. Angelus, yes. Angelus, you can't, Mom, you can't just, this is our home. Angelus, it was my home, I said. Angelus, for 45 years. Angelus, before it was ever yours. Angelus, why didn't you tell us? Angelus, his voice cracked on the last word, Angelus, and underneath the panic I heard something else, Angelus, something that made my chest ache even now, real hurt, Angelus, real bewilderment, Angelus, the sound of a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been pulled out from under him. How could you do this without telling us? Angelus, and there it was. Question underneath the question. Not how could you sell your home? Angelus, not what happens to us now. Angelus, not even. God help him. Are you all right? Angelus, why didn't you tell us? Why wasn't he included? The exact same question thrown back at me that I had wanted to scream at him across that kitchen table a month before. The morning he decided my entire future without ever once asking what I wanted. I sat on my little porch in the fading evening light and I let the silence stretch for one more second before I answered. Angelus, you told me it was time to leave, I said softly. Angelus, so I did. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Angelus, I could hear him breathing hard. Angelus could hear Lauren behind him. Angelus, her voice climbing now. Angelus, no longer background noise, but a full argument breaking out in a kitchen that no longer belonged to either of them. Where are you? Ryan finally managed. Angelus, Mom, where are you? I need to see you. I need you to explain this to me. This doesn't make any sense. You can't just, people don't just sell houses. There's papers. There's, how long has this been going on? Angelus, a month, I said. Angelus, a month. His voice broke entirely on that word. A month, Mom. You've been while we were sitting at dinner every night, you were. He stopped. Angelus, I heard him swallow hard. Angelus, was any of it real last month? Was any of it real, or were you just performing this whole time? Question landed harder than I expected it to. Angelus, I sat with it a moment before I answered. Angelus, because it deserved an honest answer. Angelus, even now. Angelus, even after everything. Angelus, every dinner was real, I said. Angelus, every conversation was real. Angelus, I love you, Ryan. That never once stopped being true, not for a single second of this whole month. But loving you and letting you take everything from me, those turned out to be two very different things. Angelus, and I finally had to choose. We weren't taking anything from you. We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves, I said, Angelus, and for the first time my voice sharpened, Angelus, the calm cracking just slightly at the edges. You toured Sunny Meadows before you ever asked me a single question. You measured my rooms for your renovation before I'd agreed to anything. You sat at that table and told me it was time for me to leave, like I was a tenant behind on rent, in the house my husband built with his own 2 hands. Angelus, don't you dare call that helping me. Angelus, silence again. Longer this time. Angelus, Mom, his voice had changed. Angelus, smaller now. Angelus, Mom, please. Angelus, just tell me where you are. Angelus, let me come talk to you. Angelus, face to face. Angelus, please. I looked out at the little street in front of my new apartment, Angelus, at the streetlights just starting to flicker on, Angelus, at the life I'd built for myself in secret over the last 30 days, Angelus, small and quiet and entirely finally mine. Not tonight, I said. Tonight I need you to sit with this. Really sit with it, Ryan. Angelus, not the panic. Angelus, not the anger. I need you to sit with the actual feeling of finding out someone made a decision about your whole future without ever once asking what you wanted. Angelus, that's not fair. Angelus, it's exactly fair, I said. Angelus, it's the fairest thing I've done in a month. Good night, Ryan. And I hung up the phone before he could say another word, before he could talk me into softening, before the sound of his voice breaking could pull me back into 45 years of automatically making everything easier for him. Angelus, my hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the little table beside my folding chair, and I sat there in the dark for a long time, and I let myself feel everything at once, the grief and the guilt that came creeping in no matter how justified I knew I was, and underneath all of it, Angelus, steady and unmoving, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Angelus, I had done it. Angelus, it was done. There was no more secret left to keep. Angelus, he called back 4 more times that night. I let every single one of them go to voicemail. Angelus, I want to be honest, that was hard. Harder than the selling, harder than the signing, harder even than the month of lying with a smile on my face. Because every unanswered call felt like a small cruelty, and I have spent my whole life terrified of being cruel to the people I love. But I'd learned something in that last month, sitting alone in an apartment near the library, building a life nobody had approved for me. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to rescue them from a feeling they desperately need to sit inside of. Around 10 o'clock, a text came through instead of a call. Angelus, Lauren's furious. Angelus, she keeps saying we need to get a lawyer. Angelus, I told her no. I don't want a lawyer, Mom. I want to understand what I did that made you do this to us. Angelus, I read that message 3 times. Angelus, what I did that made you do this to us. Not what did I do. Not even close to an Still, somewhere underneath it, a boy trying to find his way back to the mother he'd stopped seeing. Angelus, I didn't answer that night. I turned my phone face down on the little table, and I went inside and I made myself a simple dinner alone in my own kitchen at my own small table, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, nobody needed anything from me while I ate it. The next morning, Claire called before I'd even finished my coffee. Angelus, well, she said. Angelus, how'd it go? Angelus, I told her. All of it, the phone call. Ryan's voice cracking, Lauren shouting in the background, the missed calls, the text about wanting a lawyer and then not wanting one. Angelus, Claire was quiet a moment. You holding up? Angelus, honestly, I don't know yet, I said. Angelus, I keep waiting to feel guilty. Really guilty, the kind that eats at you. Angelus, and it hasn't come. Angelus, I feel sad. Angelus, I feel tired. But I don't feel like I did anything wrong, Claire, and that scares me a little. Angelus, is that terrible? Angelus, no, Claire said firm. That's called finally standing up for yourself after 45 years of not doing it. Angelus, it's supposed to feel strange. Angelus, doesn't mean it's wrong. Angelus, I sat with that a long moment, turning my mug in my hands. Angelus, he wants to see me, I said. Angelus, face to face. You going to let him? I looked around my small Angelus, quiet kitchen, Robert's chair by the window. Angelus, the little watercolor above the mantel. Angelus, the whole modest shape of a life that finally belonged only to me, and I thought about my son, Angelus, somewhere across town. Angelus, sitting in a house he thought was his and finding out. Angelus, one hard fact at a time. Angelus, exactly how wrong he'd been. Angelus, yes, I said finally. Angelus, but on my terms. Angelus, in my home. Angelus, he comes to me this time. Good, Claire said. It's about time somebody made that boy come to you. 2 days passed before Ryan worked up the nerve to actually show up. 2 days of silence between us, broken only by short, careful texts, him asking if I was eating, if I was safe, if I needed anything, questions that felt less like concern and more like a man checking that the world hadn't fully collapsed. Angelus, I answered each one plainly. Angelus, I'm fine. Angelus, I'm safe. Angelus, I don't need anything. Angelus, I didn't elaborate. I'd said everything I needed to say on that first phone call, and I wasn't going to spend it all over text messages, cheapened into little blue bubbles. Third day, a Thursday, there was a knock at my door. Angelus, I knew it was him before I even looked. Some sounds you just know. Even after everything, even after a month of secrets and a lifetime of love bent nearly to breaking. I stood in my small living room for a moment, one hand on the doorknob, and I made myself breathe. Angelus, then I opened the door. Ryan stood on my little porch, and I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, exactly same face, same eyes he'd had since he was a boy pressing his forehead to mine, but because of what was missing from it. Angelus, the confidence was gone. Angelus, the certainty. The man who'd sat across Robert's table a month ago and told me it was time to leave, so sure of himself, so sure he was doing the reasonable thing, that man wasn't standing on my porch. Angelus, in his place was someone smaller. Angelus, someone lost. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked on the single word. Angelus, I stepped back and held the door open. Angelus, come in, I said. Angelus, let's talk. He sat down on my small couch like his legs had made the decision for him. Angelus, folding down heavy. Angelus, his elbows on his knees. Angelus, his hands hanging loose between them. I sat across from him in Robert's chair, the one from beside the fireplace on Maple Street, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. Angelus, nice place, he finally said. His eyes moved around the little living room, the watercolor of the house above the mantel, the second-hand lamp I'd bought at a shop near the library, the small stack of books on the side table. Angelus, when did you find it? Angelus, 3 weeks before I told you, as I said. I signed the lease the same week I put the deed in Claire's hands. Angelus, he flinched at that. Angelus, just slightly. Angelus, so this whole time. Angelus, every dinner. Every time I talked about the contractor, the paint samples. Angelus, every time, I said. I sat there and smiled and let you plan a renovation on a house that was already halfway sold. Why? The word came out cracked, almost pleading. Why would you let me do that? Why wouldn't you just stop me? I looked at my son, at the genuine bewilderment on his face, and I felt something twist in my chest, not guilt, exactly, but something close to grief for how far apart we drifted without either of us fully noticing. "Because you never once asked me to stop," I said. "Ryan, you sat me down at your father's table and told me it was time for me to leave. Angelus, you didn't ask me what I wanted. You didn't ask if there was another way. Angelus, you'd already toured the facility. Angelus, you'd already measured the rooms. The decision was made before you ever opened your mouth to tell me about it. Angelus, so no, I didn't stop you. I let you keep planning because you'd already shown me exactly how much my opinion mattered in your plans." He opened his mouth to argue and then closed it again. I watched something shift behind his eyes, not agreement, not yet, but the first crack of doubt in a version of events he'd been telling himself for a month. "Angelus, that's not," he started, then stopped. Angelus ran a hand through his hair. "Angelus, that's not how I meant it." "Angelus, I know you didn't mean it as cruelty," I said. "I've had a month to think about that, Ryan, and I believe you. I don't think you woke up one morning and decided to be unkind to your mother. Angelus, I think it happened slowly. Angelus, I think somewhere along the way I stopped being your mother in your mind and became a problem you and Lauren needed to solve. And the terrible thing about that kind of unkindness is that the person doing it rarely feels like a villain. Angelus, they feel like they're being practical." Angelus, he was quiet for a long time after that. Angelus, I let the silence sit. I'd learned over the last month that silence does work. Words can't. It gives a person room to hear themselves if they're willing. "Lauren wants to sue," he said finally, not looking at me. Angelus, the buyers. Says there has to be something we can do. Undue influence, or I don't even know what she's calling it. She's been on the phone with a lawyer friend of hers since Monday night. Angelus, something cold moved through me. Angelus, on what grounds? Ryan, the house was in my name. Angelus, solely in my name. Angelus, I'm of perfectly sound mind. Angelus, and there is a paper trail a mile long showing I consulted a lawyer. Angelus, signed every document myself. Angelus, and sold to a fair buyer at full asking price. What exactly does Lauren think a judge is going to say? I told her the same thing, he said, and for the first time there was something almost like shame in his voice. Angelus, I told her it wouldn't go anywhere. Angelus, she didn't want to hear it. Angelus, and what do you want, Ryan, not Lauren? Angelus, you. Angelus, he finally looked up at me. Angelus, and his eyes were wet. Angelus, and my son. Angelus, my grown son. Angelus, 42 years old. Angelus, looked for one unguarded second exactly like the boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms. Angelus, I want to understand how we got here, he said. I want to understand how I became the kind of person who does this to his own mother. Because I don't, Mom, I don't recognize myself in the last month. Angelus, I keep going back over it in my head. Angelus, the conversation at the table. Angelus, and I keep thinking, Angelus, who said that? Angelus, who told his mother it was time for her to leave, like she was a tenant? Angelus, you did, I said quietly. Angelus, you said it. And Lauren stood right there and called it helping. Angelus, he flinched again, harder this time. Angelus, I heard you, I said before he could respond. Kitchen. Angelus, back before any of this happened. Angelus, you didn't know I was on the stairs. Lauren said she felt like the two of you were just waiting around for me to die or go into a home so you could finally have your life. And you said my voice caught just slightly, and I made myself push through it. You said it wasn't terrible. Angelus, you said it was just honest. Angelus, the color drained out of Ryan's face. Angelus, you heard that, he said, barely above a whisper. Angelus, 6 months before you ever sat me down at that table. Angelus, I heard every word. Angelus, he put his face in his hands. Not crying, not yet, but close to it, the particular stillness of a man trying to hold something back that's too big to hold. I don't remember saying that, he said into his palms. Angelus, I mean, I remember the conversation happening. I don't remember agreeing with her like that. Angelus, God, Mom, is that really what I said? Angelus, word for word. Angelus, I could recite it to you in my sleep. Angelus, I have some nights. Angelus, he lifted his head. His eyes were red now, properly, the dam starting to give. Angelus, I don't know who that person is. I swear to you, Mom, I don't know who says something like that about his own mother. Angelus, I think he's someone who got comfortable, I said. I think when you and Lauren moved back in after you lost your job, something in you started treating that house differently. Angelus, not as your childhood home anymore. Angelus, as an asset. Something to be managed, optimized, eventually claimed. And somewhere in that shift, I stopped being your mother and started being an obstacle standing between you and the equity. That's not. He stopped himself before the denial fully formed, and I watched him actually consider it, really consider it, maybe for the first time. Angelus, God, maybe that is what happened. I don't know when it happened, but maybe that's exactly what happened. I forgave you 100 small things over those 4 years, I said. The way you'd walk past me without looking up. The way Lauren rearranged my kitchen without asking. The way neither of you ever once said thank you for the meals, the laundry, watching Sophie every weekend so the two of you could go out. Angelus, I forgave every one of those things because that's what mothers do. Keep forgiving, and we keep giving, and we tell ourselves that's what love looks like. There's a difference, Ryan, Angelus, between love and being taken for granted, Angelus, and somewhere in the last few years you stopped being able to tell them apart. Angelus, and so did I for a while. Angelus, that's the part that scares me most, looking back. Angelus, I let it happen too. I let myself disappear a little more every year because disappearing felt like being a good mother. Ryan sat with that for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, rawer, none of the defensiveness left in it. Angelus, can I ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly, even if it's ugly. Angelus, ask. Did you do this to punish us? Angelus, the month of pretending. Was some part of you doing this because you wanted us to hurt the way you were hurting? I thought about that question carefully before I answered, because I owed him an honest answer, even if it wasn't a flattering one. Angelus, yes, I said finally. Angelus, part of me did. Angelus, I won't pretend otherwise. There was a part of me, sitting across from you at breakfast every morning for a month, smiling while you talked about your countertops, that felt something close to satisfaction knowing what I was about to do to you. Angelus, I'm not proud of that part. Angelus, but it was there, Angelus, and I think it's important that you know it was there, Angelus, because I don't want to stand here and tell you I did all of this out of some pure, Angelus, saintly place. Angelus, I didn't. Angelus, I did it because I was angry, Angelus, and because I was hurt, Angelus, and because for the first time in my whole life I had the power to make a decision entirely on my own terms, Angelus, without asking a single person's permission. Angelus, and the other part, he asked. Angelus, you said part of you wanted to punish us. Was the rest? The rest of me did it because I needed to know I still mattered, I said. Angelus, not as somebody's mother. Angelus, not as somebody's grandmother. Angelus, as Margaret. As a woman with a name and a will of her own, who built something with her husband and had every right to decide what happened to it. You took that from me the second you sat me down and told me my future without asking. Selling that house was the only way I knew to take it back. He nodded slowly and wiped his face with the back of his hand, and for a while we just sat there, the two of us, in the small, quiet living room of the life I'd built without him. Where do we go from here? He finally asked. Because I don't, Mom. I don't want this to be it. I don't want the last real conversation we ever have to be you telling me you sold the house out of spite, and me sitting here agreeing I probably deserved it. Angelus, I never said spite, I said gently. Part of me wanted you to hurt. That's not the same as doing it purely out of spite. Angelus, I did this because it was right, Ryan. Because that house was mine to do with as I chose, and because I had spent 45 years putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own, and I finally understood that nobody was going to hand me permission to stop. Angelus, I had to take it. Angelus, I know, he said. Angelus, I know that now. I think some part of me has known it since the second I found that envelope on the table. I didn't want to admit it, because admitting it means admitting what I did to you. And what did you do to me, Ryan? I asked, because I needed to hear him say it. Angelus, not for cruelty. Angelus, for clarity. For both of us. He was quiet a long moment, and I watched him actually search for the words. Really search, the way you do when you're trying to be honest instead of comfortable. I made you feel like you'd become a burden, he said finally, slowly, each word costing him something. Angelus, in your own home. Angelus, in the house Dad built. I let Lauren's convenience matter more than your feelings, Angelus, and I told myself it was practical, Angelus, and I never once, Angelus, not one single time in that whole conversation, Angelus, asked you what you wanted. I decided what was best for you like you were a child, and then I was surprised when you didn't act like one. Angelus, I felt my eyes go hot, and this time I let them. Angelus, that's softly. Angelus, that's exactly what you did. Is there any way back from this? He asked. Angelus, for us. Angelus, I'm not asking about the house. Angelus, I know the house is gone. I know that's done, and honestly, Mom, some part of me thinks maybe it should be done. I don't know if I trust myself with it anymore, if I'm honest. I don't know if I trust what I might have become, living in it, telling myself I was being practical the whole way. Maybe you selling it was the only thing that could have stopped that. That admission moved me more than almost anything else he'd said, because it meant he understood. Finally, something I hadn't been sure he was capable of understanding. Angelus, there's always a way back, I said. It's not going to look the way it used to. I'm not moving back in with you and Lauren. I'm not going to spend my remaining years folding your laundry and cooking your dinners and being grateful for the privilege of being tolerated in my own family. Angelus, that version of me is gone, Ryan. Angelus, I buried her the day I found that deed. I'm not asking you to come back, he said quickly. Angelus, I would never ask that. Not after everything I said to you. Angelus, good, I said, because the answer would have been no. He almost smiled at that, a small broken thing, but a smile. Angelus, so what does it look like? He asked. Angelus, the way back? Looks like you coming to see me here, I said. Angelus, in my home. Angelus, on my terms for once instead of the other way around. It looks like you actually asking me what I want instead of deciding it for me. Looks like Lauren apologizing genuinely, not the kind of apology that's really just an argument about the lawsuit she wanted to file if she ever wants to be part of my life again. Angelus, and it looks like time, Ryan. Angelus, a lot of it. This isn't healed in one conversation on my couch. He nodded, slow, taking it in like a man finally reading instructions he should have read a long time ago. Angelus, I can do that, he said. Angelus, I want to do that. Angelus, before he left that evening, Angelus, he stood in my little doorway, Angelus, and he looked back into the small living room one more time, the watercolor above the mantel, Angelus, Robert's chair by the window, Angelus, the quiet, Angelus, contained shape of the life I'd built entirely on my own, and something in his face changed. You did all this by yourself, he said. Angelus, not a question. An observation landing somewhere deep. Angelus, every bit of it, I said. Proud of you, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. God, that sounds insane coming from me after everything, but I am. Angelus, I've never seen you like this. Angelus, sure of yourself. I don't think I've ever actually seen my mother be sure of anything, Angelus, and it turns out he shook his head, Angelus, searching, you're kind of terrifying, Mom. Angelus, in a good way. Angelus, I almost laughed. Robert used to say the same thing. Angelus, toward the end. Angelus, Dad knew you had this in you. Dad's the one who told me to keep the house in my name, I said. He knew something I didn't want to believe. Someday somebody I loved might try to take it. Angelus, I just never imagined it would be you. Ryan's face crumpled at that, just for a second, and he nodded, and he didn't try to argue with it, because there was nothing left to argue. I'm going to earn this back, he said at the door. Angelus, whatever this is. Whatever's left. Angelus, I'm going to earn it. Angelus, I hope you do, I said honestly. I really do, Ryan. Despite everything, you're still my son, and I still love you, and some stubborn part of me still wants us to find our way to something good on the other side of this. He hugged me then, careful, like he wasn't sure he'd earned the right, and I let him, and for just a moment, standing in the doorway of my new small life, I held my son the way I used to hold him when he was small enough to fit against my chest, and some old, tired, Angelus, aching part of my heart finally allowed itself to soften, just a little, Angelus, but only a little. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think it matters. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a door that swings open all at once. Something you build back one honest conversation at a time, and that first night, standing in my doorway, we had only laid the very first board. Angelus, Lauren didn't come with him. Not that first week, not the second, not for a long time after that. I noticed her absence the way you notice a missing tooth, a hollow you keep running your tongue over, checking if it still hurts. Angelus, some days it did. Most days, if I'm honest, it didn't hurt nearly as much as I expected it to. Angelus, Ryan came alone every Sunday. Same time, almost like clockwork, the way he used to be reliable about things before the last few years wore that reliability down to nothing. He'd knock on my door with something small in his hands, a coffee from the place near the library, Angelus, a bag of the good bagels, Angelus, once a little potted herb plant because he remembered, Angelus, out of nowhere, Angelus, that I used to grow basil on the windowsill of the old kitchen. Angelus, small things. Small things I was learning are how trust gets rebuilt. Nobody hands you back 45 years of love in one grand gesture. They hand it back one Sunday at a time, one bag of bagels at a time, until you look up one day and realize the pile of small things has become something solid enough to stand on. "How's Lauren?" I asked him. Maybe the third Sunday in, because I'd promised myself I wouldn't pretend she didn't exist just because it was easier. Ryan stirred his coffee a long moment before he answered. Angelus, angry still. Angelus, at you. Me a little for not fighting it harder. He looked up at me. Keep saying we should have seen a lawyer before any of it happened. Keep telling her a lawyer wouldn't have changed anything, because there was nothing illegal about what you did. Angelus, it was just he searched for the word fair. And she doesn't want to hear that word right now. Angelus, I understand, I said, and I meant it. Being confronted with your own selfishness is one of the hardest things a person can go through, and not everybody comes through it the same way or on the same schedule. Angelus, she's allowed to be angry, Ryan. I'm not asking anyone to forgive me for protecting myself. Angelus, I know. He looked down at his hands. Wish she could see what I'm starting to see. Angelus, what's that? That you didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. That the only person who did anything wrong in that whole story was me. The apartment near the library started to feel less like a hiding place and more like a home somewhere around the second month. I want to tell you about the mornings, because the mornings were where I found myself again, in a way I hadn't expected. I'd wake without an alarm, whenever my body decided it was ready, which was a luxury I hadn't allowed myself in longer than I could remember. I'd make coffee in Robert's old pot and carry it out to the little porch, and I'd sit in my folding chair. I bought a proper rocker eventually, but that first folding chair held a special place in my heart, Angelus. It was the chair I'd been sitting in the night Ryan called, and I'd watch the street wake up. An old man 3 doors down walked his beagle every morning at 7:15, rain or shine, and we started nodding to each other, then waving, then eventually stopping to talk. Angelus, his name was Walter. His wife had passed 4 years earlier. We didn't talk about anything important, Angelus. Most mornings the weather, Angelus. The beagle's opinions on squirrels, Angelus. Whether the little bakery on the corner had good scones that week. But it was conversation I chose, with a person I chose, on a schedule that belonged entirely to me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been sent for exactly that until I had it. I joined a book club at the library, the actual library, Angelus, the one my apartment sat 2 blocks from, Angelus, which felt like a small joke from the universe, Angelus, that I'd ended up living in the shadow of all those books after decades of never having time to read one straight through. The women in that club were sharp and funny and completely unimpressed by anybody's excuses, and the first month I went when I mentioned carefully, testing the water, some of what had happened with Ryan, Angelus. A woman named Patricia set her teacup down hard enough that it rattled the saucer. Sold the house right out from under him, she said. Not a question, just turning the fact over in her hands like she was admiring it. Margaret, honey, that might be the most interesting thing anybody in this club has ever done. We've been reading about women doing brave things in novels for 11 years. Angelus, you went and did one. I laughed so hard I had to set my own tea down. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that anyone had looked at me and seen something interesting, rather than something to be managed. Angelus, 6 weeks in, I got a call from Emily Hart. Margaret, she said, warm as ever. I hope this isn't strange, but Daniel and I wanted to invite you over. We've been in the house almost 2 months now, and we wanted you to see what we've done with it, Angelus, and what we haven't touched. I sat with that invitation for a long moment before I answered. Part of me wasn't sure I could bear it walking back through those rooms as a guest, a visitor in the place that had held my entire life. But a bigger part of me was curious, and curiosity, I'd discovered over the last 2 months, was worth following. Angelus, I'd like that, I said. I drove over on a Saturday afternoon, and I sat in my car in front of the house for a full 5 minutes before I could make myself get out. Angelus, the green shutters were still green. Porch still ran the length of the front, same as always. But there were new flower boxes under the front windows. Angelus, cheerful and a little wild. Angelus, clearly Emily's doing. Angelus, and somehow that small addition. Angelus, rather than feeling like an intrusion. Angelus, felt like a gift, like the house had grown. Angelus, rather than changed. Emily opened the door before I even knocked, like she'd been watching for my car. You came, she said, and pulled me into a hug like we'd known each other for years instead of months. Inside, the front room was rearranged, new furniture, a different rug, but the bookshelves Robert built still stood exactly where they'd always stood, and the oak floors gleamed like Daniel had spent a full weekend on his knees caring for them, which it turned out he had. In the kitchen, the original cabinets were still there, freshly painted a soft cream that somehow made them look both new and exactly the same. Robert's table, the one with the burn mark near the corner, sat in the same spot it always had. Couldn't part with it, Emily said, following my eyes. Angelus, we looked at new tables. Angelus, nothing felt right. This one already had a life in it. I ran my hand over the burn mark the way I'd done 10,000 times over 45 years, and my throat went tight. And then Emily walked me to the dining room doorway, and there they were. Angelus, the pencil marks. Angelus, Ryan, age 4. Angelus, age 7. Angelus, age 11. Angelus, untouched. Not painted over, not sanded down, exactly as I'd left them. Angelus, we had a framer look at it. Angelus, Daniel said. Angelus, coming in behind us. Angelus, just to see if there was a way to preserve it permanently. Angelus, under glass. Angelus, keep it from fading. We didn't want to just leave it exposed to time. Felt like something worth protecting. Angelus, I stood in that doorway, and I cried, really cried. Angelus, not the careful. Angelus, controlled tears I'd allowed myself over the last 2 months. Angelus, but the full. Angelus, shaking kind. Angelus, the kind I hadn't let myself have since Robert died. And Emily didn't try to stop me or comfort me out of it. She just stood beside me, with her hand on my back, and let me have it, the way you let a person have a feeling that's been owed to them for a very long time. Angelus, thank you, I finally managed. Angelus, for seeing it. Angelus, for understanding what it was. Thank you for trusting us with it, Emily said again, the same words she'd said the very first day. We're the lucky ones, Margaret. This house came with a whole life already built into it. Angelus, not many houses have that. I drove home from that visit lighter than I'd felt in months, and somewhere on that drive, I made a decision I'd been circling for a while without quite landing on it. Angelus, I called Ryan that evening. I want to invite you and Sophie to my place this Sunday, I said. Angelus, just the two of you. Not Lauren, not because I don't want her there eventually, but because I think this next part is between you and me and your daughter. What's the next part? He asked, and I could hear the wariness in his voice, the way a man braces when he's not sure if what's coming is good news or bad. Angelus, you'll see, said. Angelus, come at 11. And Ryan, bring your dad's old tools if you still have them at the house. Angelus, the ones in the garage. Sunday came, Angelus, and Ryan and Sophie showed up at 11 on the dot. Angelus, Sophie bursting through my door with a particular unbridled joy of a 9-year-old who has, Angelus, for once, Angelus, been told absolutely nothing about the plan. She threw her arms around my waist, and I held on to her, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling something in my chest loosen the way it always did around that child. Grandma, your place is so cute, Angelus, she announced. Angelus, already wandering room to room. Angelus, it's like a dollhouse. Angelus, can I see everything? Angelus, everything, I told her. Ryan stood in my doorway with a canvas bag of Robert's old tools slung over his shoulder, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Angelus, what's this about? He asked. I led him out to the small strip of yard behind my building, barely more than a patch of grass, really. Angelus, nothing like the yard on Maple Street where he used to chase butterflies. Angelus, but mine. Angelus, entirely mine. Angelus, and enough for what I had in mind. build something, I said. Angelus, a little garden bed. Angelus, nothing fancy. Angelus, and I want your help doing it. Angelus, with your father's tools. Ryan looked at the bag in his hands, and something moved across his face. Grief, maybe, or the particular ache of a man handling his dead father's hammer for a purpose that finally felt worthy of it. I haven't used these since he passed, he said quietly. I didn't know I still had them in the garage. I found them last week, packing up some of the stuff before the movers came for the last of it. Angelus, I almost didn't bring them today. Angelus, wasn't sure I could. Angelus, but you did. Angelus, I did. He looked up at me. Angelus, you asked me to. We spent that whole Sunday afternoon building a small raised garden bed together. Angelus, the two of us on our knees in the dirt. Angelus, Sophie running back and forth, handing us things she decided we needed. Angelus, narrating the whole project like a very small. Angelus, very enthusiastic for me. Ryan measured the boards the way his father taught him decades ago in a garage on Maple Street. Angelus, I held them steady while he drove the screws. Angelus, neither of us talked much. Angelus, we didn't need to. There was something being repaired in that silence that words would only have gotten in the way of. When we finished, we stood back and looked at it, a crooked little rectangle of soil. Nothing Robert would have called his best work but ours, built with his hammer, by his son and his wife, 45 years and one broken family later. Dad would have made fun of how crooked that corner is, Ryan said. Dad would have been proud you tried, I said. That was always more his way than you remember. Angelus, Sophie planted the first seeds herself. Angelus, digging little holes with her fingers. Angelus, entirely too many seeds packed into entirely too small a space. Angelus, and neither Ryan nor I corrected her. Angelus, because some lessons are better learned in the spring than explained on a Sunday afternoon. That garden became something of a ritual after that. Ryan came every other Sunday to tend it with me, and slowly, gradually, the visits stretched longer, the conversations stretched deeper. Told me things I don't think he'd ever said out loud to anyone, how frightened he'd been, losing his job, how the fear had curdled into something ugly, a desperate need to control something, anything, when everything else in his life felt like it was slipping. How the renovation had never really been about the kitchen at all. It had been about proving to himself and to Lauren that he was still capable of building something, providing something, being a man who made things happen instead of a man things happened to. Angelus, I took it out on you. Angelus, he said one Sunday. Angelus, kneeling in the dirt. Angelus, not looking at me. Angelus, all that fear. Turned it into a plan, and the plan needed you to be smaller so it could work. Angelus, I'm not proud of that. I don't think I even understood I was doing it until I sat in your living room that first night, and you made me say it out loud. Angelus, fear does strange things to people, I said. Angelus, it doesn't excuse it. But I understand it better than you think. How do you forgive someone for something like that? He asked. Angelus, really forgive them. Angelus, not just tolerate them again. I thought about that question for a long moment, my hands in the dirt, the late afternoon sun warm on my back. You don't forgive it all at once, I said. You forgive it in pieces the same way you broke my trust in pieces. Angelus, every Sunday you show up. Angelus, every time you ask instead of tell. Every time you choose me over your own comfort, even in some small way. Eventually the pieces add up to something whole again. Angelus, we're not there yet, Ryan. Closer than we were. Lauren finally came 3 months after that first phone call. Angelus, she showed up alone on a weekday evening. Angelus, no warning. Angelus, standing on my little porch with her arms wrapped around herself. Angelus, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her look. I almost didn't recognize the woman standing there. Gone was the crisp confidence, the gentle condescension I'd grown so used to over the years. Place was someone who looked, for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely uncertain. Angelus, can I come in? She asked. Angelus, I understand if you say no. Angelus, I held the door open. Angelus, she sat where Ryan had sat that first night. Angelus, on the edge of my couch. Angelus, her hands twisted together in her lap. Angelus, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. Angelus, I've been so angry, she finally said. Angelus, for months. Angelus, at you mostly. Told everyone who'd listen that you did something cruel. Angelus, underhanded. Punished us for a decision we made with good intentions. She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet. Took me a long time to admit that I wasn't angry at you for what you did, Margaret. I was angry because what you did made it impossible for me to keep pretending I hadn't done anything wrong. Stayed quiet, letting her get there in her own time, the same patience I'd learned to give Ryan. Angelus, I said terrible things, she went on. In that kitchen, on the stairs, Ryan told me you heard some of it, months before any of this happened. I've thought about that conversation every single day since he told me. I said we were waiting for you to die or go into a home so we could finally have our life. Her voice cracked. What kind of person says that about her mother-in-law? What kind of person thinks it even? Angelus, a frightened one, I said, echoing what I'd told Ryan weeks earlier. Person trying to build security by clearing away anything that felt uncertain. I don't think you're a monster, Lauren. Angelus, I think you got scared and scared people do ugly math. Angelus, that's kinder than I deserve, she said. Angelus, probably, I agreed. Angelus, and something in my honesty made her laugh, a small, Angelus, surprised. Angelus, watery laugh. Angelus, and something in the room loosened just slightly. I don't expect you to forgive me today, she said. I don't even know if I've earned the right to ask for it yet. Angelus, I just needed you to know that I see it now. Angelus, all of it. Angelus, what we did to you. Angelus, what I said. Angelus, I'm sorry, Margaret. Really, truly sorry, not the kind of sorry that's secretly hoping to get something back for it. I looked at my daughter-in-law, sitting on my couch with her hands twisted together, finally seeing me not as a problem to be managed, not as square footage in the way of an island and an office, but as a person she'd hurt and needed to answer to. Angelus, thank you for saying that, I said. Angelus, it matters more than you know. Angelus, can we? She hesitated. Angelus, is there a way back for us? There's always a way back, I told her, the same thing I'd told Ryan months before. Angelus, it just has to be built slow and it has to be built honest. No more deciding things about my life without asking me first. No more talking about me like I'm already gone from the room. Angelus, can you do that? Angelus, I can try, she said. Angelus, I want to try. Angelus, then that's a start, I said. That's all any of us can offer each other. Angelus, a start. Autumn came, and with it my first Thanksgiving in the new apartment. Angelus, I'd wondered, Angelus, in the quiet weeks leading up to it, Angelus, whether I'd spend the day alone, whether the wound between my family and me was still too raw for a holiday that had always centered around Robert's table, Angelus, a table that now sat in someone else's kitchen. Angelus, I'd made my peace with the possibility. I'd even started looking into whether the library hosted anything for people spending the holiday solo, because I'd decided, somewhere in the last few months, that I would never again let loneliness catch me by surprise the way it had for years without my noticing. Angelus, but Ryan called 2 weeks before. Angelus, and this time Lauren was on the line too. Angelus, both of their voices coming through together. Angelus, a little nervous. Angelus, a little hopeful. Angelus, we want to host, Ryan said. Angelus, at our place. Angelus, all of us. Angelus, you, Sophie, us. And Mom, we want you to bring whatever you want from your kitchen here. Angelus, we're not trying to recreate the old table. Angelus, we know we can't. We just want you there. Angelus, however that looks. I thought about that invitation for a long moment, turning it over. Angelus, I'll come, I said, but I want to bring something with me. Something of your father's, Ryan, if that's all right. Angelus, anything, he said. Angelus, whatever you want. Thanksgiving Day. Angelus, I drove to their new place, a smaller house. Angelus, actually. Angelus, than the one on Maple Street. Angelus, one they'd bought modestly. Angelus, sensibly. Angelus, 6 weeks after the sale. Angelus, once the reality of building their own life without an inherited house had fully set in. I carried in a box, and inside it was Robert's chair, the one from beside the fireplace, the one I'd taken with me the day I left. I'd decided in the weeks before that some things are meant to be given, not just kept. Mom, what are you doing? Ryan asked, watching me carry it through the door. Making room for your father at the table, I said. Angelus, not the whole table. Angelus, just a chair. Angelus, I think that's enough. We set it in the corner of their small dining room, an old wooden chair that didn't match anything else in the house, standing out exactly the way I'd hoped it would. Angelus, Sophie ran her hand along the armrest. Angelus, this was Grandpa's. Angelus, it was, I said. He used to sit in it every winter, by the fire, and tell the worst jokes you've ever heard in your life. Angelus, tell me one, Sophie demanded. Angelus, and so sitting at a table that wasn't Robert's table, Angelus, in a house that wasn't Robert's house, Angelus, surrounded by a family that had come apart and was slowly, Angelus, carefully stitching itself back together, Angelus. I told my granddaughter one of her grandfather's terrible jokes, Angelus, and Ryan laughed, really laughed, Angelus, the way he used to as a boy, and reached over and squeezed my hand, Angelus, and for the first time in a year, Angelus, I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as whole. Been a little over a year now since that Sunday morning at the kitchen table, since the words that broke my life clean in half. A year since I cut my son's name off a set of blueprints with the good scissors. A year since I sat in a lawyer's office and signed my name for the last time on a house that had held 45 years of my life. I still live in my little apartment near the library. Still have coffee with Walter and his beagle most mornings. Angelus, I still go to book club, Angelus, where Patricia still tells anyone who'll listen that I'm the bravest woman she's ever met, Angelus, and I still tell her, Angelus, every time, Angelus, that bravery had very little to do with it, that mostly it was just refusing to disappear one day longer than I already had. Ryan and Lauren visit every other week now, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes just the two of them, and every visit is smaller and more honest than the family dinners we used to have. Nobody measures my rooms for a renovation anymore. Nobody talks about me like I'm furniture waiting to be cleared out of the way. My son asks me what I want before he makes plans that touch my life, and some days that still catches me off guard how strange it is to be asked, after so many years of simply being told. The garden bed behind my apartment came up beautiful that first spring, wild and overcrowded exactly the way Sophie planted it. Tomatoes and marigolds tangled together in a way Robert would have found ridiculous and wonderful in equal measure. Still tend it together, Angelus, Ryan and I, Angelus, every other Sunday, Angelus, kneeling in the dirt with his father's tools, Angelus, saying less than we used to need to say, Angelus, because some of what needed saying has finally slowly, Angelus, been said. I think about that morning at the old kitchen table, often the pancakes going cold, the words "you've had a good run here," the particular cruelty of being told your life had become someone else's inconvenience. I think about the woman I was that morning, the one who folded her hands and said nothing and let herself be spoken about like she wasn't fully in the room. And I think about the woman I became in the weeks that followed, the one who found her own name on a deed and remembered, all at once, exactly who she was. Angelus, I lost a house that year. I won't pretend that loss doesn't still ache on certain quiet evenings when I think of the burn mark on that table, the pencil marks in that doorway, the staircase Robert built with his own 2 hands. But I found something in that loss I don't think I ever would have found any other way. I found out that I was never just somebody's mother, somebody's help, somebody's problem to be quietly relocated when the renovation plans required it. Angelus, I was and I am Angelus, and I will always be Angelus, Margaret Collins. A woman who built a life once with her own 2 hands, and when that life was threatened, built another one, entirely her own, from nothing at all. Angelus, they wanted me to leave quietly. Angelus, I left on my own terms, Angelus, and I came back on them too, and that, Angelus, more than any house, Angelus, any kitchen, Angelus, any wall they wanted to tear down, Angelus, is the thing nobody will ever be able to take from me again.